Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Greening Inland Shipping presented by the Port of London Authority. My name is Matthew Moss and I work for Innovate UK KTN and I'm the Maritime Lead. Innovate UK KTN, we work alongside government to connect innovative companies together to ultimately drive positive change, me specifically in the maritime sector. So today, I think the first thing I want to remind everyone is that we are recording this event for the benefit of others who are not able to attend. So anything that you do type in the chat will be recorded to take note of later on, but please don't let that discourage you from typing in a little bit perhaps about you, who you are, and networking with others in there. We'd love to hear from you today and have you interacting with both our panel and our speakers, which brings me on to who are our lovely speakers. So let me load up my screen so you can see our little agenda for today. So who do we have? Obviously me. You've got stuck with me at the beginning, but I'm going to hand swiftly over to both Tanya Ferry and Alistair Gale of the PLA to give a little introduction from their point of view. I'm then going to run through a very brief overview of the different options, decarbonisation options there are for maritime activities. And then we're going to go into a series of pitch sessions followed by Q&As. Unfortunately, in the early hours of this morning, a couple of our speakers had to drop out for family reasons. So we're going to skip right through those, but we hopefully will be able to get presentations from them and distribute those afterwards. So I think that leaves no further ado, but then to hand across to Tanya and Alistair to give a little introduction from the PLA. Over to you both.
Hello, folks. My name is Alistair Gale. I'm in charge of Corporate Affairs and Strategy at the Port of London Authority, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to this event today. Greening Inland Shipping, this event today is a logical development of our first Greening Inland Shipping event, which we hosted in 2019. That was a toe in the water, if you like. And at that point, we really had no feel for the level of interest in greening inland shipping. And we very quickly learned when we found we had more than 150 people in the room that there was a substantial amount of interest. And in fact, for us, that first event grew from earlier emissions focused work that we'd done. We launched the first air quality strategy for a UK port 2 years before. And that same year, we introduced reduced port charges for cleaner, greener ships as well. So hopefully it's clear that emissions reduction is a priority on the Thames, which is home to the UK's largest port and is also its busiest inland waterway. So we're seeing new cleaner fuels introduced on the river, reducing carbon and other emissions. And we're seeing emissions reduction technology trialed and adopted as well. So I think with events like this, it's always important to just pause and think why. We know it's important, but let's just underline a few of the reasons why. I think there's no stronger motive for this work than last week's report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That says that humans and nature are being pushed beyond our abilities to adapt to climate change. And almost half, over 40% of the world's population are now highly vulnerable to that climate change. But there is still hope if the rise in temperatures is kept below 1.5 degrees centigrade. This matters to all of us, everybody on this call, but probably most especially to the young people who will be joining our companies coming into the world of work for the first time. And I think if we do the maths, and maths isn't my strong point, but an 18-year-old starting with us today will retire, my maths told me anyway, around 2071. Now, assuming that retirement ages don't vary between now and then. By 2071, the legal deadline for transitioning to net zero will be 21 years past. So the decisions we make today are essential for those young people. And I'll include my children, can't really call 21-year-old a child, but I will include my children in it nevertheless. So that's the context for what we're doing today, finding the best ways to cut emissions, reduce the acceleration in global temperatures, and ultimately to protect our collective futures. So at the PLA, what we can do is host or prompt events like these, which are bringing people together, showcasing these new greener technologies. And so today, that's what we're going to be doing with the help of KTN, the technology providers and the river operators. We're going to look at these new technologies, get into them in some detail and debate them. And we hope that this will help operators find out more about these new technologies, make more informed investment decisions, and ultimately cut vessel emissions. So I'm looking forward to a really interesting couple of hours as we hear about some of these new solutions. And I'll hand over to Tanya to say a few words to put things into context as we get underway.
Thank you, Ali, and thank you all for joining us today. I'd particularly also like to thank Knowledge Transfer Network, particularly Matthew and our 4 panellists for agreeing to attend this event to make it an interesting discussion on the technologies we provide. As you know, and Alistair has indicated, we have been working on the river on the challenges of emission reduction, both on the vessels, but also the port and our own fleet since 2018, having published the first port air quality strategy in the UK. As Alistair's also noted, the science behind the impact of existing emissions that have been affecting our planet and our lives has been brought into sharper focus. In 2018 and ever since, we've recognised that challenge of reducing the further emissions is not going to be overcome working in isolation, but only by working together. We have a strong community on the Thames that makes us more capable than others to deliver it by working across sectors and across the walls that bound the river to the land and the terminals. For example, we also work across the globe with international ports to learn from others that might have got to certain conclusions faster than we have, as well as understanding what shipping routes might need to influence what's required in London in the future. Since 2019, we've had a roundtable with inland operators, a number of them in the panel today, trying to talk through some of those technology challenges and solutions, which have supported the public events that Alistair has mentioned just now. And I'm proud to say that this is the 3rd event in a row where we've been hosting this publicly. We've also been working on guidance as different solutions come to light to help solution come into implementation rather than just as a thought or an improvisation. We've also monitoring the progress of all our operators on the river and our own actions as a fleet provider ourselves. We've partnered to help access funding, for example, the Clean Air Thames project, which has meant 2 vessels along the river have scrubbers being installed on them, and they will be announced, and the findings of that will be resulted in a report shortly. And more recently, we have the Maritime Hydrogen Highway project with international and national universities and collaborators to try and understand how a particular fuel, hydrogen itself, could be used in the port environment. But infrastructure to make this transition is key. We are lucky to have many terminals along the river looking towards their future investment and trying to plan for alternative fuels. We have, with KTN help, investigated shore powers for the ports in a similar process to what you'll see today in today's event. As such, I'm pleased to say that the initial model for alternative fuels in the port will be published this afternoon and help reduce emissions from the maritime sector within the estuary by investment and working again together. And all the while, the PLA has been working behind the scenes on the regulatory framework for new fuels and solutions to facilitate these new technologies and fuels as necessary to reach zero emissions. So like Alistair, I'm really excited to hear how technology providers today are able to help our fleets decarbonise on the river. And I look forward to hearing some of the panellists' questions about the practicalities of the solutions and the types of vessels we have on the river. And now I'd just like to run through the specific people I need to thank. So the panel is made up for 4 people who've given their time today to ask the questions of the technology providers. So Kirk Cowdery from Cemex, John Spencer from GPS, the tugs operating on the river, and Andrew Osborne from the PLA ourselves, and Tom Wobbs from Silverfleet. I'll pass it back over to you, Matthew. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanya and Alistair, and welcome to everyone else in the chat. Yeah, please continue to network in there, and it's just great to have so many people sort of involved and learning about these various different decarbonisation options that we have. So what I'm going to do is build off the back of what Tanya and Alistair have presented and sort of really delve into the perhaps grander scale of the challenge of decarbonising the maritime sector, and then have a little look at the planned government sort of policy timeline, and then go into some of the available options. But I'm going to be very high level in sort of my overview of them, and then we're going to let our speakers pitch to you on sort of more technical requirements of those, and show off what they can do. So here I've borrowed a graph, or I've produced a graph from the Department for Transport and Environment Statistics. This is across all transport modes. This was for 2019, so it's not going to be swayed by COVID or anything like that. In blue there, we've got international shipping and domestic shipping. And now that doesn't actually look like a lot, even if you were to add them together when compared to cars and taxis. But what I'm going to do is highlight just why that maritime sector is so important and also so difficult to decarbonize. For cars and taxis, it was popularized in around sort of 2008 by Elon Musk. Tesla is kind of quite a sexy option when it comes to decarbonizing. People want to buy into it, and it's a lot more readily available. If we're looking at the maritime sector, there is no Tesla of the sea just yet, though some of our panelists may attest that they're working on something very similar. So, as I mentioned, a car, we put a battery in it, and therefore we've got an electric car where we've kind of ticked that decarbonisation box. It's very simple. The technology has won out. In the maritime sector, it's not so simple. We've got a whole range of technologies available that could help to decarbonise. So batteries, ammonia, methanol, hydrogen, even biofuels are all potential options. And there's more, such as wind propulsion. It's likely we're going to need a combination of all of these in order to decarbonise and green our shipping routes. So going a little bit further, if we were to continue on the current trajectory, on the graph on the right-hand side there, that is the red line, the current rate of decarbonisation, we're not going to hit net zero by 2050. So we really need, over the next, now we need to be implementing these technologies and an accelerated journey through the 2030s and 2040s in order to hit net zero by 2050. Just highlighting how important it is for the maritime sector to take an act now in order to hit that target. I would caveat that this data does not, it is based solely on fuel consumption. It doesn't associate any other activities relating to the maritime sector in the ports environment, for example, when factoring into this calculation. So actually, it's likely that the emissions for the overall maritime sector are a lot higher, further highlighting the need that we need to do something sooner rather than later. So this question always comes up, what is the government doing about it? Well, they set out the overall sort of timeline, which is 2050. We know that through the Clean Maritime Plan that all domestic ferries are going to be zero emission by 2050. And as a kind of interim target by 2025, all new vessels are going to be zero emission capable. Now, that doesn't mean that they have to be burning sort of clean green hydrogen straight away, but they must have the ability to do so in the future. But what happens in the middle of that? That's quite a big gap in the timeline there where action needs to happen, but the government have been a little bit, let's say, vague. So we have a 2-year consultation period. So there's going to be a series of consultations over the next 2 years, one on shore power, which is open now. So if you have evidence and wanted to submit it to the need of shore power, I encourage you to do so. In the next couple of years, there's going to be a consultation on the phase out of new fossil fuel engines. There's going to be a gap analysis performed on what are the short-term opportunities, where can the UK really take advantage in the maritime sector. And there's also going to be a refresh of that Clean Maritime Plan, which was published in 2019. There is going to be some money available, and last year there was the Clean Maritime Demonstration Competition. It's hoped that later this year, the Department for Transport have already announced that the maritime sector is going to get a share of 300 million, but what that programme might look like is still under development, and they're going to establish the UK Shipping Office for the Reduction of Emissions, UK Shore, in order to fund some of these projects going forward. So there is hope out there that in that sort of middle timeline, that action is going to happen and enable us to hit net zero by 2050. So let's move into some of the technologies that are available. So first of all, I'm going to look at LNG, or I guess you could throw LPG into this mix here. Very crudely, I guess, looked at the pros and cons. So what is the advantage of LNG? Well, it's still a fossil fuel, which I guess is a disadvantage, but it has a very high energy density when compared to HFO, which is heavy fuel oil, 18% higher. The infrastructure is available and it's rapidly growing. A lot of the new build vessels, or the big vessels we're talking about at the moment, are being built with LNG as the primary propulsion system. The sulfur emissions are low just by the nature of how LNG is produced. There's very little sulfur in that fuel. And I've put there in quotes a cleanest of the fossil fuels available. So there is a CO2 reduction when burning LNG as a fuel. The technology is very mature. And as we've already got vessels in operation running on it, the regulatory route is quite clear. The cons, obviously, it's more energy dense, but volumetrically, it's less dense than heavy fuel oil. You can get slippage, which is unburnt fuel, not being burnt and then being emitted into the atmosphere, which could, in theory, if LNG being predominantly methane, could lead to a higher global warming potential than carbon dioxide. We all know with our home bills that gas prices are increasing, and they're even more unstable with the current sort of situation that's going on between Russia and Ukraine. Who knows what that's going to look like in the future? Is it really a sustainable option? And I think the key is, if we are going to hit net zero, there is going to need some element of carbon capture, because it is still emitting CO2. It is still a fossil fuel, which can be expensive. So my outlook on this is that there's probably limited CO2 reduction technology, but it could be taken advantage of now because it's quite mature, and it's a lot more mature than some of the other lower carbon options out there. Looking at another still carbon containing option is biofuels. Now, biofuels are used quite readily in the automotive sector. Sort of FAME, which is fatty acid methyl ether, is blended into, or if you have a diesel car, you have about 7% of FAME already in your car engine. So it's a mature technology. Looking at some of the other fuels, such as HVO, which is hydrogenated vegetable oil, that can be used directly in a normal diesel engine without any need for sort of further modifications to that engine. And the same can be said in the maritime sector. So that's nice and simple. It's just a case of getting your hands on enough HVO. And for most of these biofuels, they can be blended with conventional diesel in order to get some CO2 reductions with, yeah, as I say, very little modification. Some cons of the biofuel sort of market is, I think, scalability is really important. There's most of the, at least for FAME and for HVO, we're getting the feedstock for that from either waste resources or from plant-based sort of crops. Where is that coming from? Are we chopping down a rainforest in Brazil to plant palm trees, or more likely soy in Brazil, to then go ahead and make ourselves more sustainable in the West? Is that really the ethical thing to do? Is that the sustainable thing to do? No, I think is the answer there. And also, if we're using waste-derived feedstock, so I'm talking about here, so perhaps waste oil from sort of your chip shop, your local Chinese, Indian restaurants, anywhere that might use vegetable oil, there's only a limited amount supply of that, and the road sector is probably going to go electric, so we're probably going to have that feedstock from there available. But also the aviation sector is also heavily looking at waste-derived fuels. So I think there's going to be a lot of competition for feedstock in the future, and between us, the aviation sector has a lot more money than maritime, so they can probably buy the feedstock at a higher price compared to maritime. So is it wise competing with aviation? Maybe, maybe not. So my outlook is, yeah, great, you can drop it in directly into an engine in the case of HVO. For FAME, there's probably going to be a little bit of engine modification needed, but concerns over the feedstock and scalability, I think biofuels could be a nice interim solution, but long-term, I don't see that being the case for maritime. although emission reductions in the near term could be good to enable you to maybe do more research on some of the other decarbonisation options I'm going to flag up to you next. So hydrogen. Hydrogen is everywhere at the moment. The government even published their own hydrogen strategy. It's set to play a very important role in not only transport, but in our homes heating and cooking in the future. So I think the most obvious pros is with hydrogen, there's no carbon involved, so no carbon dioxide emissions. It's quite flexible. You can combust it directly, or you could use it in a fuel cell. It's got a very high energy density, 3 times higher than heavy fuel oil. But the cons, I think the public perception, if anyone ever mentions hydrogen, Hindenburg comes not far behind. So that public perception of using hydrogen and the concerns about its safety are an important one to consider. There needs to be a lot of education and definitely safety involved when using hydrogen. It is the smallest molecule, so it can, if we were to use it in conventional sort of engines and systems, it can sneak through gaps in sort of seals and in valves. So perhaps need to design new infrastructure around that. Currently, most hydrogen is produced from the cracking of natural gas. So that's obviously a fossil fuel. So in the future, if we want to really hit sort of net zero, we need to be looking at green sources of hydrogen in order to make it fully sustainable. And we also need to ramp that production up quite quickly because we can't keep, as I mentioned when I was talking about LNG, very unstable prices there. So we don't know what's going to happen with the gas supply in the future. We need to make sure that we're getting our hydrogen from a secure and sustainable means. Storage of hydrogen is tricky, and I think the infrastructure required, we perhaps are getting there technically to large scale storage of hydrogen. It often requires very high pressure or very, very cold cryogenic temperatures. So not quite there yet, but there's lots of interesting projects, and we're on the right track to sort of storing and producing large quantities of hydrogen. So my outlook is we're going to need a huge increase in production because hydrogen is being touted to use for everything. And I think if you'll see in some of the upcoming other fuels such as ammonia and methanol, hydrogen is essential for all of those. So we're going to need to produce lots of nice, well, hopefully green hydrogen in order to be able to make these other fuels. So ammonia. So the pros of ammonia are it's used quite widely at the moment. It's probably in most fertilizers there, and the Haber-Bosch process has been established for quite some time. So that we know that the production is scalable, and it can probably use existing infrastructure, albeit we might need a little bit more of it. Ammonia is often transported around the globe. Big cons is it's a horrible chemical. It's really toxic and really corrosive. So you probably don't want to be around that. I think if you were a seafarer or a mariner, you won't really want to be in the presence of ammonia if you could help it. The current production is currently from fossil fuels because the hydrogen element is produced from fossil fuels. So as I mentioned before, really need to get some green hydrogen and pop that into the Haber-Bosch process in order to make a green ammonia. That is the ideal situation, but we're not there yet, just due to the fact we don't have that scalable green hydrogen. So my outlook is, yes, ammonia, we know it can be scaled and we know it can be distributed around the world, but we are very heavily reliant on a nice clean source of hydrogen in order to develop that. It could also be used in fuel cells directly, which we'll hear from one of our later speakers talk about. So methanol, I think methanol is a really interesting one because AP Moller Maersk have committed to, I think they've bought 13 now, methanol powered vessels, which a big player in the industry really putting their foot down and saying that methanol, they believe, is the fuel of, or one of the fuels of choice going forward. So I think one of the big pros is, unlike some of the other fuels we heard about before, like the hydrogens, well, unless you store it under very, let's say, harsh conditions, can be stored as a liquid at room temperature, which is a lot easier. There's an existing supply chain. It's used very frequently in the chemical industry. It's kind of a building block for many chemicals out there, methanol. So we are experienced in the infrastructure and storing and distributing it. So the cons, again, it's currently produced from fossil fuels, and that is due to the hydrogen element. So going back to hydrogen, you see now how important hydrogen is in sort of any future fuels for maritime. It has got a lower energy density than some of the other fuels mentioned before. So you obviously need a lot more of that to achieve the sort of same power requirements. Worldwide production, although it's used in chemicals, the sort of usage in chemicals is very small when we compare it to sort of how much would be needed to use it as a fuel. And as yet, there is not perhaps a clear regulatory use as methanol as a fuel, but though with the likes of Maersk bringing those vessels online, they're going to have to go through the regulatory process to get those in the water. So although that is a con, I think that's going to be easily achieved and overcome in the not too distant future. And again, it's a carbon containing molecule, so we are going to need some form of carbon capture in order for it to be net zero. So my outlook is that there's some big industry players backing methanol as a fuel. However, we just need to solve that carbon capture sort of problem and sourcing the green hydrogen. And then I think methanol is in with a good shout of being one of the fuels of the future, along with all the other ones there. I think the final one, we're going to hear a couple of speakers speak about this today, is batteries. So as I mentioned before, batteries are very, I guess, popular and increasingly common now in the automotive sector. So there's a lot of knowledge and leverage that can be drawn from that sector to translate it across to the maritime sector. It is zero emission during operation, but I know if we look at the con side, some of the environmental impacts of the sort of further supply chain do need to be considered to determine whether it is truly sort of sustainable or not. And because it is a mature technology, we're developing new battery sort of designs all the time. The supply chain is quite well established and the prices are going to continue to fall. So the cons, and I think this is a really important one for maritime, is that the energy density currently is probably not high enough for some of the larger maritime applications. For some of your smaller applications, I think it probably has a good fit. Grid constraints, obviously for batteries, we're going to need to charge them up. Quite often where you've got a boat, it's normally on the very end of a grid sort of connection. So if you were to plug in perhaps a vessel of any considerable size, you may start to draw power from sort of the homes around there and leave them without power while you're trying to charge up your boat, or it might wipe out the grid completely. So there needs to be sort of close working with the DNOs to make sure that if we are going to be charging a vessel, that we can do so without, sort of wiping out the neighborhood town. And I think this is another sort of key one. And I think the questions around sort of second life of batteries haven't yet been determined, but the battery life is often going to be shorter than the vessel lifetime. Typically, a vessel might have a lifetime of, let's say, 20, 30 years. The battery's probably not going to last that long. So you're going to need to either sort of purchase another battery or swap out the battery during the vessel lifetime, which can add costs. So my outlook is energy density is probably a little bit of a concern, but for specific use cases, batteries could be a really promising option. But I think in all of these, you'd have to do a use case analysis across all these different fuels in order to determine what's best. Because although for the automotive sector, electric is clearly, I'd say nearly 90% and more going to be the right choice. For maritime, I don't think that's going to be the case. We're going to see a range of all these different fuel or power options, maybe even combined with some solar, wind propulsion, etc. But maybe for those operators on the Thames, you're not going to have a big sort of Flettner rotor sort of, on the top of your tug. That's perhaps not appropriate, but maybe a kite or something similar could be. So that's my very quick overview of some of the available technologies for the maritime sector. I'm going to hand over now to our first speaker, which is Paul Andrews of Oak Technical Services, to give his 5-minute pitch, and then we'll go into some Q&As. If you have any questions for Paul during that presentation, please feel free to pop them in the chat. And for our panelists, I'll be coming to you first after Paul's presentation. So Paul, can I hand over to you, please?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks for that introduction, Matt. It was really interesting and informative, and actually mirrors quite a lot of the thoughts that we have here and things I touch on in this presentation. So if we go into the first slide. So just to give you an overview of who we are and what we do. So we're a research and development business called Oaktech. We're just moving into a commercial phase with Oaktech Technologies with a new business called Cage Technologies Limited. So I'm going to talk here about some of the work that Oaktech has carried out over the last few years. Was maybe slightly unfashionably, Oaktech is primarily an engine developer, but we've looked over a long period of time at ways to develop cleaner and more efficient engines, and with a primary focus on harnessing the advantages of gas fuels. So Oaktech has developed clean, low-emission engines fueled by LPG, more recently bio-LPG, biogas and hydrogen. We've also worked with other gas fuels like butane and combinations of gas fuels. So we have a really good understanding of what allows gas fuels to work really well in an engine. So our sort of brand Cage is the application of our technology to engine platforms, and again with an absolute focus on low emissions and engine efficiency, but with the objective of developing these clean engines without compromising performance. And particularly the focus of everything we do is looking at replacements for existing diesel engines. So Cage technology has been developed well over 20 years, but in a more focused way over the last 8 years with funding from Innovate UK and the EU. And the opportunities that we're currently addressing are currently served by diesel engines. And one of the great things that helped us in our journey was the VW emissions scandal, which took the focus away from diesel engines to alternatives. So our Cage engines that we've developed, and I'll talk about in the presentation, are direct replacements for equivalent diesel and petrol engines. And we've just moved into, over the last 18 months, trial phases with generators supplied to HS2 at Euston, powering welfare units. And we're about to begin the trial this month of our first hydrogen engine or hydrogen generator in Orkney, it's part of the HIMET project, which is the Clean Maritime Demonstration Initiative that Matthew mentioned earlier. So the next slide. So what is a Cage engine? So we take generic engine platforms, and our focus currently is on engines below 100 kilowatts, and then we apply the Oaktech developed control and combustion systems to those engines. So we typically take petrol or diesel engines and apply Cage technology to them, and the technology is absolutely focused on minimal emissions. So for off-highway engines, there's a new emission standard launched by the EU. It came into force in 2020 called Stage 5. So all our engines are targeted at least meeting the Stage 5 standards, but in most cases performing significantly below the Stage 5 standard. So with two themes, looking at air quality, so low NOx and carbon monoxide hydrocarbons, and then of course the reduction in carbon emissions. So everything we do is focused on intelligent engines with full digital control, and this enables lots of clever strategies such as stop-start and optimized combustions. The LPG engines we've developed will take either gaseous LPG direct from a storage bottle in a small power output application, and then the most recent engines we've developed use direct injection into the combustion chamber. So that directly injects the liquid LPG. The engines are as powerful as the diesel or petrol engines that they replace. And the key thing is that we are looking at integrating these clean engines with battery systems, so hybrids that harness both renewables and the clean, efficient engine. So the next slide. So maybe just to spice the presentation up a bit, I'll put a car in there. It's nearly, well, over 15 years ago, Oaktech was a world leader in development of automotive hybrid systems for motorsport. So we were sponsored by Honda and Bosch to produce this hybrid rally car in the picture. And we were developing energy recovery 5 years before the KERS systems were launched into Formula One. So we have a great expertise in how battery systems and energy recovery and energy storage can work in an application of this type. Little did we think at the time that our technology would actually become commercialized in a site welfare unit. So in the second picture, the unit in the photograph is a welfare unit that is currently at Euston Station. So we have the little cage gas generator here, and then in the unit is a battery bank, and then on the roof of the unit is a solar array which takes the sun, stores it in the batteries. The batteries are the main power provision for the unit, but when the battery state of charge falls below a certain point, the generator automatically switches on and replenishes the batteries. So this system typically reduces carbon emissions by over 70% in winter and over 95% in summer when the sun's shining. And there's lots of ways potentially that this hybrid technology can be used for other purposes. The unit's been on trial since November 2020, and there's now 5 of those units in the London area. And we think this type of hybrid technology has potential for marine applications, and particularly with the size of engine we develop in smaller vessels. And there's lots of potential sources that where energy can be harvested. So, as Matt mentioned, from solar, from wind, and potentially when a vessel is moored from the motion of the water.
1 minute, Paul.
Okay, yeah, next slide. So I'll roadmap it. We're just launching our first products to market. So we have biogas generators, which we're supplying to Kenya, to off-grid communities, using a different version of the cage engine. And as I mentioned, the hydrogen engines are about to go on trial in Orkney, but we have a lot of interest from lots of sectors in those hydrogen generators. They work really well. They're a plug-and-play solution. If you take a diesel generator out, put the hydrogen engine in, providing you've got the source of hydrogen, but they work just the same. We've recently been doing a project with Jaguar Land Rover where we're developing their automotive engines for gas fuels. So all the gas fuels mentioned, but particularly with the focus on LPG initially. And these engines, so the prototype 3-cylinder turbocharged engine will produce 100 kilowatts of power. And then we have a program of work looking at more efficient solar and wind hybrid systems. And a key thing for us as a relatively small business, so we have a headcount of about 10 people, is that we're now trying to fast track the deployment of the technology through a first investment raise to stimulate the commercial deployment. So Oaktech works, we're only a small company, but we have an amazing array of really strong strategic partners. We work very closely with Imperial College, so everything we supply to HS2, they monitor the emissions. We work with EMEC in Orkney, Jaguar Land Rover, as I've mentioned, Cala, and then 3 of the largest UK construction companies who are looking at rolling our technologies out as a replacement for diesel. So the next slide should be the final one. So that's me, available for questions, email, happy to answer any queries and embark in any discussion to drive this technology forward. And thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Paul. So I think because of two of our speakers have unfortunately got family issues, I think you've got a Q&A session dedicated all to yourself. So John, you had your hand up first from our panel. What's your question, John?
Is this cage technology limited to these small engines, or can it be adapted to larger engines? I mean, that's the first one, and sort of the other one really is is about NOx. You know, presumably you're still going to be producing NOx if you're burning anything in any engine. So does it wind up? You know, how is NOx actually reduced in these engines?
Yeah, well, two very good questions. I mean, in terms of scalability, the technology is scalable, but there are people developing and with commercial industrial sized gas engines. Maybe not at the level of sophistication that we're using on the smaller engines. But I think we've sort of initially we have to focus on one area of the market because we can't do everything. And we think the best way of developing the technology, of trialing it and proving it, is by starting with smaller units first and then looking at how that can be scaled. One of the things that I didn't really mention in the presentation is that we are just embarking on a project to do what we call a hybrid gas engine. So this sort of covers the 2025 objective of having zero emission capable engines introduced sort of early on. So what we are doing is we're developing a sort of LPG range of engines that will work equally well with hydrogen. So we can effectively, as the hydrogen supply chain becomes more mature, we can switch away from LPG and onto hydrogen, and in that transition period actually run on a mixture of LPG and hydrogen. And that technology again could be scaled to much larger engines. In terms of NOx, that's a really good question because it's something we have an obsession with. So it's one of the clever things about our combustion strategies is we run in a sort of low NOx at source sort of sweet spot. And this is particularly relevant for generator engines that are sort of steady state and don't have to respond to sort of transient load conditions. So we run what we've coined a phrase called cool combustion. So NOx production is a function of combustion temperature and pressure. And by keeping the combustion temperature low, we can almost eliminate NOx at source. So all the hydrogen engines that we produce for the Oaktech project are zero NOx, yet they still produce the same power as the petrol engine that they're based on. But certainly NOx with hydrogen engines in certain phases of combustion is a big problem. Looking at the work we're doing with Jaguar Land Rover, that doesn't typically use the cool combustion technology in most of its applications. And when there's a high load demand, that all the emissions are cleaned up by really effective automotive after treatment systems. So the LPG engine we're supplying, the 3-cylinder JLR engine that we're supplying to HS2, if you put that on an emissions analyzer, everything's zero NOx hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide. So it's a really, really clean engine.
Thanks, Paul. We've got two questions. One from Andy first. Andy, if you want to ask your question, if I'd ask you to keep your answer brief for these, because we need to, press on. No problem.
Yeah. Hi, Paul. My question is around maintenance. What's the maintenance regimes on these types of engines versus something more traditional?
Well, that's one of the great advantages of gas engines. They don't suffer from the liquid contamination of the oil. So in a liquid combustion engine, typically diesel can run down the bore and into the oil, and it requires more regular oil changes. So in a gas engine, the oil changes should be significantly longer than a diesel engine, and because the engines are clean, that you take the combustion chamber apart and it's like new after thousands of hours. So it is a big advantage of gas.
Thank you.
And a final question from Tom. Tom, are you there? Nope.
I think he's muted.
Yeah, I can see him muted.
There we go.
There we are.
Morning, Paul.
Hi, Tom.
Have you worked with any asset finance companies to package up what you do?
We haven't, because we're just embarking. So I suppose just giving a throwback to what we've been doing over the last 2 years throughout COVID, a lot of this technology has actually been developed with Innovate UK funded projects throughout the COVID period. We're just coming out of that. All the projects had trial phases at the end of them. The trial phases have been incredibly successful. Everything we've put out onto trial, there's a commercial demand for it. So we're now just putting together that sort of investment sort of portfolio to put out to the investment community. So we're at quite an early stage, but we're really keen to talk to people who can help us grow very quickly, because we think we have a lot of solutions here.
Great, thanks very much, Paul, and thanks for panelists for your questions. We're going to move on to an actual block of speakers now. We're going to have 3 in rapid succession, each 5 minutes each. First up is Amr Mahmood of Marine Zero. We'll be followed by Tim Munn of Iconsys, and then Matt Candy of Steamology. So first speaker, yeah, you could share your slides, and you've got 5 minutes. Over to you.
Just going to try to find the slide. Good morning, everybody. Just a minute, give me 1 second. Yeah. Sure. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, just pop it into full screen mode and then we're good to go.
Okay. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Hi, my name is Amr. I'm representing Marine Zero today for hybrid and zero emission technologies. We are a UK company based, and but we are working, let's say, with mostly zero emission and hybrid technologies. Started in the UK, and we have very long experiences with this kind of propulsion and power and propulsion technologies globally, as we have really long experiences with very big companies before in passenger vessels and icebreakers. Let's say I would focus today on the short sea shipping, including the let's say the Thames or lakes or any river vessels. Let's say that the one which is really running in short sea. And thanks to Matt at the beginning, he was really touching a lot of things. I would rather really not to repeat, but he has really good insight. I was thinking not to really repeat the same solution, but here I could take something about the optimization. So Marine Zero is actually, let's say, enable all these kind of technologies what you have in the market to one solution, which work with, let's say, we enable the technologies what you have in the market in one solution and deliver it to any kind of ships. So starting from let's say we see the system as let's say a solution as a one. We don't like differ between the engines or batteries or fuel cells or charging. It's actually all is one. So coming from let's say charging technology, we understand that if you have battery on board, if you even don't have battery on board, you need to have a zero emission while you are in the shore. You need to have a charging system, and the charging system is very crucial here because we need to think about it as not just for one vessel. You need to think about it as a whole. How many ships you have, how many ports you have on your locations. Like, you need to think about it as one solution for many ships. So one of the things really important here is to think about it holistically, and optimizing the shore connection, working very good with the utility companies and defining the power requirements for your fleet is really important. So rather than just thinking about solution for one vessel, it would be not optimized, because you most probably will change the power demand, or it will change the power demand if you have different batteries in different vessels. So you really need to understand that even if you're not, let's say, upgrading your vessel now, or even have a new build now, you need to think about the future, what you will going to do in the future. So charging solution is really important for this kind of vessels. We are talking about, let's say, if you could save like a couple of minutes or 3 minutes, 5 minutes for charging time, or you have like extra power, it means like technically you could just have a smaller battery pack on board, or just have like a smaller system on board. So a charging system plays a really crucial thing here. And then in charging, you could have like two solutions, either manual or automatic. The manual is rather taking a long time, as you know, that you need to have like people doing it and connecting the plugs and ensuring that everything is running, and then it will take a long time to charge. Then it means like technically you would have like a bigger battery on board, depends on the how long time you really have to charge. And then the automatic will take rather fast, and then it would be good in when you have really like fast operations, and also like the power density could be higher. And then it depends really how you build your system. And then the DC grid is the onboard system, which is actually enable all kind of new sources of energy you need to connect. So if you have a battery, if you have a fuel cells, they are both DCs. And then the charging system also can be AC or DC, but let's just continue with the smaller ferries, then rather to save payload on the ferries or in the tugs, then you could have like the charging to be DC, then you are connecting directly to the DC grid system or microgrid system. The electric solution here is actually modular, so you could just build or scale actually as any load you have or as any energy source you have. And then, so it's just actually very flexible. One of the things here is that people tend to hear, like when they see DC word, they think about the old DC technologies, what has been done in like until 1950. I would say this is actually totally different technology. It has also like AC inside, so all the loads that you have on board, and let's say all kind of auxiliaries or total load, it will be AC as you have. So the only thing is that the source of energy will be just connected to the DC, and then after that, anything is AC, as you know. And then the battery system, which is like really good for kind of short distance shipping. Of course, you cannot just implement it for blue water ships, or let's say cruise or ice going, whatever, because it should really have something really huge battery pack. And then you need the kind of applications in this kind of vessels, you could just use it for I'm talking about the big ones. You could just use it for peak shavings, or let's say some like zero emission when you just maneuvering or something like that, but not really like full zero emission. But for lake ferries, or for river cruises or small tugs, whatever, you could just reach. Depends also about the vessel size or the space what you have, and then the charging technology. You could really make it like zero emissions batteries. Of course, we have a lot of pros and cons, but battery is very, as Matt said at the beginning, it's very mature technology. It has a lot of changes also, but the technology, electrically and in integration level, it's very mature in that sense.
1 minute.
Okay, then you could just add let's say I would just say also about the fuel cells. And the fuel cells is again, it's something closer to engine rather than to batteries. So you technically use any kind of let's say green fuel, or let's say liquefied hydrogen, or LNG or methane or anything to produce energy. Depends really how much you really need to have a clean solution. If you need to have the cleanest, then it has to be hydrogen. If you need to still have CO2 use, you can use any other fuel. But then the other thing is that you really need to understand that from where you produce this energy, it has to be green. If you really look about the holistic view, and optimization here is that I would say that we need to study the whole system together, not just one single vessel or one only onboard solution or one single charging or one only battery. It has to be really holistic and working with let's say the all stakeholders to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to go swiftly on to the next presentation. Tim, if you're able to share your screen, and 5 minutes for your presentation. If you have questions for any of our speakers, please feel free to pop them into the chat as they are speaking, and we'll come to them afterwards.
Yep. Hello, everyone. People will know me with several different hats today. I'm presenting iConsys and the iConvert product. Just a quick. No, I can't. Oh, yeah, I can. So just quick summary of iConsys, as I haven't got long. Company founded 1987. It's now growing considerably, 60+ workforce, and quite a few projects under the belt delivered. Now, in terms of iConvert, what this really is it's a shore power solution. I guess the novel concept here is it's got built-in microgrid control system at its heart. So what that does is it allows you to integrate batteries into the DC link, but also renewable sources of energy. This is commonly used where the grid stability is not so great, and that was referred to in one of Matt's slides earlier on. iConvert can be used either onshore or offshore, depending on the type of application. But the main point here is it's doing the power conversion, and can either provide charging power to a vessel if the vessel has got batteries, but it could also provide just simply hotel load if a vessel wants to switch off or perform cold ironing when it's alongside. It's the technology in terms of the actual components that within the system. iConsys or stands for Independent Control Systems. We're technology independent. So we've designed it to incorporate technology from the major providers, but the overriding microgrid control system is an iConsys design. And that's really me. I think I'm quicker than I thought I did. That's just a slide showing some customers, mainly in this area, that iConsys have had in the past. Okay.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Tim. Yeah, nice and brief. Yeah. On to our final presentation from this block of 3. We've got Matt Candy from Steamology.
Hello, can you see those slides?
Not yet, Matt. We can hear you though.
Right, that's showing us sharing. No. Is that sharing?
It is indeed. Yep. Over to you.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. So hello, my name is Matt Candy, and I'd like to introduce you to Steamology.
You might want to swap to swap the screens over. We're seeing your note view.
Sorry?
You might want to swap your screens over. We're seeing your note view at the moment.
All right. Here we go. Schoolboy out. Is that working?
Perfect.
Great. So over 10 years ago, the Steamology team broke the land speed record for a steam-powered car, and the project gave us experience in high temperature and high pressure steam and steam turbines. We broke the record, but we didn't smash the record. So 6 years ago, we started to take the new approach to zero emission power. The combustion of hydrogen and oxygen creates clean green steam. There's no carbon, no NOx, no SOx or particulate. The only product of combustion is hot steam. So we're transforming water into power. Renewable energy is plentiful but intermittent. 10,000 times more solar energy strikes the earth every day than we use, and it's free. Direct electrification should be used where possible, but in the hard to abate industries, we need a different approach. And renewable energy can be used to power electrolysis, which creates hydrogen and oxygen gas. The gas is collected, compressed and stored in tanks, and these gas tanks are the battery of our system. When the sun's gone down or the wind's not blowing, energy is demanded, gas is combusted in our steam generator, and steam delivers power. Water is produced that can be returned for electrolysis. So we have three product groups that share the same core technology. The first is gas to steam, where stored gas is used to generate steam for a number of industrial processes. Zero emission steam is generated within seconds at a wide range of quality and quantities. And pure steam can be supplied to a range of industries looking to reduce Scope 1 emissions. Saturated steam can be provided up to 250 degrees centigrade, which creates medium grade heating. The second area is gas to power. Stored gas is used to generate steam, driving a turbine to generate power. And we can provide hydraulic, mechanical, or electrical power, or a combination. Steamology technology is quiet and does not use any rare or toxic materials. It's fully recyclable at the end of life. Gas to power markets include transport and static applications, and we're developing high power steam turbines for industries facing imminent decarbonisation. Compared to fuel cells, we've got three distinct advantages at high power: much more energy dense, much longer life, and much more cost effective. And the third product group is renewable energy storage and electrical generation for on and off-grid applications. And we're developing a containerized renewable energy storage system for deployment in Kenya. Zero emission steam turbines can provide mechanical, electrical, and hybrid power drivetrains, and these can be for trucks, trains, or marine. We've been working with Viva Rail to complete a 100 kilowatt range extender, developing 750 volt DC traction motors for traction order batteries. We've got a passenger rail diesel engine replacement program at 300 kilowatts using a ZF transmission to utilize regenerative braking. There are some 3,700 DMUs in the UK network, and they face the decarbonisation schedule of 2035 in Scotland and 2040 in the rest of the UK. A 300 kilowatt engine is a versatile diesel engine replacement unit with multiple applications and a global addressable market. Our rail freight project is developing a 600 kilowatt steam turbine for high power electric drive. You're welcome to come and visit a demonstration of our test cell equipment in high power turbine, a 900 kilowatt dynamometer, and discuss our clean maritime decarbonisation project, which we've been working with Plymouth Marine Laboratory, and our potential crew transfer vessel projects. So Steamology is currently pre-revenue. We've got workshops near Salisbury in Hampshire. We've got a dream steam team of people with the strength and depth of experience to design and deliver and support affordable product with a global reach. We filed and approved IP at TRL 5 to 6. We've raised EIS seed funding and about 2 million in grants. So with the audience here today, you can help us in a number of ways, promoting our drop-in diesel engine replacement for zero emission vessel propulsion, demonstrator opportunities. So my name is Matt Candy. Thank you for listening. Please let me know if you've got any questions, and together we can make green power make a difference.
Thank you very much, Matt. So now we have an opportunity to ask some questions to those three speakers. So panelists first, do anyone want to come in with a question? If not, we'll take some from the chat. John.
Yeah, I was particularly interested in the Steamology idea. Of course, you know, it does, of course, rely on being able to convert the hydrogen, or get the hydrogen and the oxygen in a green manner. But what concerns me is just what sort of consumption of this energy we're going to have to produce the steam.
Yeah.
And what does that mean in terms of the volume, the amount of space that you're going to need in a vessel for the energy?
Yes. So we've been challenged in the past. Can you offer fuel cell efficiency at half the price? And so we're quite comfortable with that. So from a conversion point of view, we're looking at the same sort of efficiency level. Just picking up on the fuel purity, actually, because we're combusting the hydrogen and oxygen, we don't need the 5 nines purity that fuel cells typically would need. And we can also use grey and blue sources today as we move to a greener hydrogen economy tomorrow. So we've got sort of commercial advantage today to escalate the hydrogen economy. And even when we're working with green hydrogen, we don't need the same fuel purity. So you can save on electric. The engine remains small, so it gives us space for the fuel storage. But yes, we do need to store both fuels. And we're working closely with DNV and a number of solution providers for both gas and cryo. But the overall package maintains the cost effectiveness and the energy density. So happy to look at duty cycles if you've got some to offer.
Yeah, we can certainly look at that. I mean, the big concern apart from that for me is always actually the regulatory framework. Both oxygen, pure oxygen, and hydrogen tend to get the regulators extremely worked up. So yes, you know, that is an obvious concern that needs to be dealt with. And as I mean, currently, I understand that hydrogen has to be stored on deck, or at least in a space that can vent naturally. Yes. So in other words, we store it below the deck, but it'd have to be common with the sea, I guess. Have you looked into that?
Yes. Side of, so we're actively engaging with the clean maritime decarbonisation. We've had an opportunity to talk with the MCA. We've been working with the DNV for some time, and on our rail projects, actually working with TUV. So we're really trying to get best practice and understand and bring in a regulation from other industries as we tackle a new way of handling these fuels. But it's not without its challenges, but we're embracing those and happy to discuss that with you.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Yeah, definitely. I think the MCA have, well, hydrogen is all a very, and well, any of these fields are all brand new to them. So they're, in some cases, learning as they go. But as Matt said, there is, I guess, some lessons to be learned from other sectors. It's just a case of you don't know what you don't know. So it will improve over time. Tom, you have a question for us?
Yeah, is there an optimal operation that either one of the gentlemen might prefer as their first dip into the Thames? So, you know, is there a particular power requirement, I guess, that or way of operation that would lend itself to either one of these technologies?
From a steamology point of view, we've become cost effective about 200 kilowatts all the way through to a megawatt. And we can do a mechanical drive. We've been working quite closely with ZF in a range of sectors, from rail, road, non-road going, and marine. So the simplest implementation would be a mechanical drive system. But on our CMDC work, we're working with Duro Drive, and that's an electric, very efficient contra-rotating drive. But 200 kilowatts to a megawatt as a diesel engine replacement on an existing vessel would allow us to do a demonstration project.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there from an iConvert perspective. iConvert starts around about 500 kilowatts and goes up to around about 12 megawatts or so. So it's quite a big range there.
Perspective from Marine Zero as well?
Yes, I think I could just agree also with STEM that we have a really high range. So it starts from really small let's say from 300 kilowatts up to several megawatts.
Thanks very much. And Paul, you wanted to jump in as well.
Yeah, just a question for Matt. What's the thermal efficiency of the steam turbine?
Well, the steam turbine is actually impulse turbine, so a Curtis wheel turbine. It's not like a gas turbine, so they're typically around about 55%. To go from the gas to actual delivered power, we're looking in the low 30s at the moment, with an aspiration to get to 40. If that helps. But we'll give you the same performance on a cold day as a hot day, and the beginning and the end of life. So again, the overall sort of sales line, if you like, is fuel cell efficiency at half the price would be reasonable, but over a long life. But I can specifically go into the different parts of the conversion. The heat conversion from the chemistry of the hydrogen, where we burn the hydrogen and oxygen together in our steam generator, is extremely high. But I can break it down for you, but perhaps better offline.
Andy, did you have a question you wanted to come in on?
Yeah, please. A question for Tim about your products, about working in sort of restrictive areas like confined spaces, you know, in a busy Thames. How does that stack up?
In terms of where the equipment goes?
Yeah, in terms of logistics.
I mean, the iConvert itself is typically a containerized solution. It doesn't necessarily have to go alongside the vessel, because at the end of the day, there's a cable which then connects into the vessel using a connection system of some kind, and that's usually vessel specific.
Okay.
In terms of hazardous areas, that's one I'd have to look at, because that's that's quite a special use case.
Okay, thank you.
We've got a question from the chat, which I guess any of you feel free to come in on. We're going back to the sort of topic on hydrogen in the marine system. It says that HSE are doing a lot of work regarding sort of the safety of hydrogen. What are the specific concerns for the maritime sector? Matt, maybe potentially one for you.
Sorry, just repeat the question, Matt.
So HSE are doing a lot of work regarding the safety of hydrogen, but what are the specific marine concerns?
I was just reading that. So yes, yes, we've engaged a little bit with conversations with the HSE, but actually in terms of commercial work, we've been working with DNV, and as I say, on the rail side, we've been beginning with TUV. So we're beginning the system boundaries and the understanding of the implementation. Part of the Clean Maritime Decarbonisation has given us access to the MCA as well. So I think it's emerging, and that's we're actively looking at the system boundaries of our system as placed into a number of vessels, in particular a catamaran vessel at this time.
Thanks very much.
Do you want me to just jump in there?
Yes.
From my knowledge of hydrogen, it's really about having the hydrogen in a confined space below deck. I think this was referred to by one of the previous speakers. It's the MCA rather than the HSE, and certainly new vessels that are incorporating hydrogen are looking at ways of getting that hydrogen out, as mentioned by a previous speaker, naturally rather than having to force vent it.
Thanks very much, Tim. John, you've got perhaps the final question of this session.
Yeah. This is really for all the contributors, really. The whole business of engaging with MCA is absolutely key to us, because as operators, we're faced with an MCA which is really very, very slow to react. I can tell you that currently MCA don't even know how to issue international engine pollution certificates to engines that are suddenly burning HVO instead of gas oil. So, how quickly do you think you can actually get MCA, and indeed, you're going to need to go beyond that to IMO, to understand and produce necessary regulations that are going to enable us to use the solutions that you're proposing. So I'm interested to know, the stage of engagement, really, because we could be 8-10 years away before they actually give us permission to use these technologies.
So, Paul, you wanted to come in on that answer?
Yeah, we have exactly the same issue with the VCA, Vehicle Certification Agency. So they are responsible for certifying an RMM, so industrial engines. So we've gone to them with a hydrogen engine and said, how do we certify it? And they said, at the moment, we don't know. So I think that collectively, people developing technology and all the other stakeholders need to start putting pressure on government to make these regulatory authorities sort of respond quicker and think harder and make things happen faster.
Conscious the MCA aren't here to defend themselves in this, but maybe I because I work quite closely with them, they are new to this, new I guess ways of working, and they are open to it. But as you kind of said, John, yeah, it is slow, and sometimes it's painstakingly slow. But the more sort of new technologies that are thrown in their direction, hopefully, the quicker the process gets in the future. Tim, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to reiterate, I mean, you've got to look at, there's multiple projects going on globally, developing hydrogen carrier vessels, ammonia carrying vessels, methanol carrying vessels, and quite a few of them have already received approval in principle from classification societies. We are falling behind as a country, I feel. But I think it's at a stage now where, and that's what was mentioned by a previous speaker, is where it's got to go up to a higher level of government to press the case.
Thanks very much, Tim. And with that, we shall conclude this little mini section and move on to our next batch of speakers. So first up, we have Alenka from Lena Energy, and then we'll move on to John Irving from Zem Fuel Systems. So Alenka, if you could share your slides. Just pop that in full screen mode and then you're good to go.
Sorry. Sorry, can you help me, please? I cannot find a full screen.
So it's, if you look at sort of the bottom right, there's a little magnification sort of slider. It's just the button to the left of that. So you see at the bottom where you've got notes and then there's a series of little buttons. It's the button on the far right hand side. Or you can hit F5 on your keyboard. That should also do it.
Oh, yeah, I think that this is going to be better. Can you see it now?
It's still in normal view at the moment. Or if you're just at the top, click on slideshow, and then you can start from the beginning.
The thing is that I cannot even see. I'm so sorry. Why is this happening now? I'm really sorry, everyone.
Perhaps reshare your screen. No. There you go. Theo's taken over for you. We can see your slides if you want to, and just tell him to.
I'm really sorry. I don't know. I really don't know what happened here. Okay, so good morning, everybody. My name is Alenka Zema, and I'm IP and Grant Funded Manager at Lena. I'm pleased to be here presenting our company, and I'm gonna give you a short presentation of our future product, solid sodium state batteries. So I don't think, okay, yeah. So why sodium state battery? So because they are more sustainable, they are safer, and at lower cost than the most widely used lithium ion. The sodium state battery has excellent performance, and it will be competitive with the existing lithium batteries. Then they are sustainable. We can talk about the local supply chain for the raw materials, which will save us money and time long term. and they are safe. The chemistry of the battery is inherently safe and can operate at the high temperatures without the need for the cooling agent. And finally, the cost. It won't exceed $50 per kilowatt hours once at scale. And the simplified manufacturing plant will reduce the cost when compared to the lithium ion, which costs are at the moment over $100 per kilowatt hour. So the next slide. So Lina is currently running 3 public funded projects funded by different government bodies. So the first one is Lina Wave. This is the project that is funded by Innovate UK Department for Transport. And we are partnering here with BB Marine and Lancaster University to determine the feasibility of using Lina's energy battery platform in marine applications. So this project is specifying end user requirements for both propulsion and auxiliary services, taking the needs of a service operation vessel currently being designed in the UK at the basis of this task. And then the second project is Faraday, is Lina Power. It's Faraday Battery Challenge. In this project, partners will demonstrate a battery prototype system to TRL6 at the end. And we will confirm the disruptive potential of Lina battery to provide electricity storage truly fit for the purpose of electrifying road transport. And we will also look into the Lina's manufacturing process for scale up and also into the recycling and reuse rates that are achieved at the volume production. And the last project is Lina 2. This one is funded by Department for Business and Energy, Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. In this project, the 3 SMEs, including Lina, will demonstrate 1 kilowatt per hour prototype battery system in commercially relevant conditions, showcasing that the cost, safety, and environmental benefits this battery technology can bring, but we are going to focus into the stationary storage. So who we are? We are a team of 25 people. Our tech leadership previously worked commercializing fuel cells and now applying that experience to re-engineering sodium nickel chloride batteries. Our CEO is Dr. Jean Lewis. He's got over 20 years of experience in research and development in fuel cells and now with the batteries. He's got also 10 years experience on the board level. Then Dr. Richard Dawson is, let's say, the father of our technology. And we also have our James Moorish, who is looking at the business side of the company. And then the whole board is supported with the world-class expert advisors, as you can see on the slide. And so the next slide is, the whole story of Lina Energy began in 2017 when we spun out of Lancaster University, and we're now operating on our own 5,000 square feet labs in the center of Lancaster. We have an extensive IP portfolio covered in many territories worldwide. And then we also have our own testing facilities. And finally, we are partnering with Ion Venture to demonstrate 1 kilowatt per hour system. This will happen by the end of this year. And then also we are partnering with BB Marine to validate batteries for marine applications, as already mentioned previously when explaining Lina Wave project. And this is all. Sorry, was there anything? No, this was all from my side. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alenka. And our final speaker of today, John Irving from Zen Fuel Cells. John, welcome.
Oh yeah, let's see. You see that?
It's just loading on my side. Yep, there we go. All good to go.
Okay, welcome from sunny Scotland. Yeah, I'd like to tell you a bit about zero emission marine fuel systems, and mainly about our current project with Department for Transport on ammonia use. So ZEM is a startup. It's been being nurtured over the last 3 years now, and it is now starting to make some significant progress. So we've been concerned, like everybody on this call, about reducing emissions from marine, but also addressing the CO2 issue. And I think we're very aware that you're not going to replace the fleet very readily with lots of new ships. So I think reducing emissions, there's mention about NOx removal from other speakers, is really important. And then I think reusing technology. So I think particularly we're looking at fuel cell technology as a way of being more efficient and producing less CO2. Even if you use reformed diesel, you could halve the emissions and remove sulfur and NOx emissions. And eventually, I think synthetic fuels, methanol or ammonia are key. So part of the team is myself. I'm based in the University of St Andrews and a lot of fuel cell background. And Snejan is our Chief Operating Officer with a significant amount of business.
John, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I can't hear you. It's really quiet.
Sorry, can you hear me now, or is it? I wonder if it's got.
I'm able to hear from my side, maybe just a case of talking a bit louder, John.
Okay, just in case it's got the wrong microphone, can happen that way. So Snee is our Chief Operations Officer, and we're supported by an advisory board. So Port of Cromarty Firth, Andrew and Joanne, and Shandia, Swedish electrification of ships company, David Smith, who's involved in or very keen to produce ammonia in Scotland, Jeff O'Lear from Low Emissions Research Global, and Vinny from Net Zero Technology Centre in Aberdeen. And one of the things we've been doing is looking at direct ammonia fuel cells for maritime propulsion. And this is a Department of Transport project that's due to finish at the end of March. So the intention is to decarbonise shipping. And I think if you consider the amount of CO2 produced from shipping, it's about 2.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And I think we're likely to see more shipping, not less, as we move forward. So even if we improve the efficiency, we're still likely to see a significant increase in CO2. So that's a very clear justification for moving to renewable fuels and cleaner technologies. The market volume of larger ships is 50,000 with a market of something like 30 billion. So it's a really important opportunity for job creation and for cleaning up the environment. Now, my colleague Martin Smith at the University of St Andrews leads the High Seas 3 project, which is developing a hydrogen ferry, and they recently succeeded in doing a full-scale string test. So everything except the ship, and that was performed in Norway as part of a European project. So for shorter ranges, hydrogen is perfect. But for longer ranges, hydrogen doesn't have that good an energy density once you store it. And that's where ammonia comes in. And we're looking to use ammonia as a fuel. This is used as a fuel, and a direct ammonia fuel cell. You've got no NOx emissions whatsoever. You don't need to to make sure to clean up, and you can avoid ammonia emissions. And there's a lot of ammonia shipped around the world at present. In fact, an awful lot of ammonia. So the technology is there. It just needs to be installed. So within our project, we've been working with Lurg and working with their technology and using their tubular ceramic fuel cells. And we've been testing these in ammonia and comparing them to similar hydrogen-nitrogen mixes. And the ammonia works just as well. In fact, it even works slightly better. That's one of the main points in these graphs. So the thermodynamics gives you a slight boost in terms of the ammonia cracking. And we've run these for 250 hours in our target lab tests, and we're not seeing degradation. So the technology seems well proven. Really important is that we get no ammonia coming out. So even if we don't use all the fuel, we just get hydrogen coming out the other side. And ammonia itself would be a really bad thing to admit. It doesn't take us forward in many different ways. For example, smog. And currently we're putting this into a stack. This is part of the stack, and we're testing that at the moment. And we're working towards hundreds of watts in this stage and looking towards a 3 kilowatt demonstration in coming years. So the technologies work remarkably well in such a short project. And we're looking with Cromarty, looking at markets such as small boats initially, cruise ships and ferries, and then working up to where we really need to clean up in a long distance shipping. But there are inland waterways such as the Thames, or the cruise ships in the fjords are really good opportunities. We'll probably see our entry by auxiliary power. So you can run an ammonia fuel cell during the night when you're docked in a harbour without making any significant noise or producing any pollution. And also the sort of cold ironing opportunities. And at Cromarty, it was originally oil based, and it's now looking to fueling the offshore wind. So we're looking at ships like that, as well as smaller boats such as this research vessels, and looking to find those. And so if you want to contact Cromarty, Lurg, Zem, or St Andrews, there are contact details here. And just to thank the Department of Transport, Scottish Maritime Trust and Innovate UK, and indeed Net Zero Technology Centre. We've been successful as being a TechX pioneer, and that is just launching at the moment. So thank you very much for giving me a chance to speak to you, and I hope you could hear okay.
But from my side, thank you very much, John, and hopefully our panelists were able to hear you too. Kurt, you've got the first question. You're muted at the moment, Kurt.
Sorry, Matthew. I was couldn't get off mute.
No.
John, I'm the Marine Director for Cemex. We're a building materials company, global. So primary is cement, followed by aggregates and ready mix. So every sort of aspect of decarbonisation, Cemex are all over, and marine is no different. But we've now started to carry out an exercise on ammonia. We've done a number of exercises, but it's not a technical question, just a general supply chain question, which we're not able to answer at the moment. I mean, one of our ships would take 38,000 litres of fuel, another would take anything up to 450, so it's quite varied. But do you see ammonia in the future being readily available for our consumption? Because to me, it feels as if it's a question that's not yet fully answered. And again, I suppose you don't know who's going to take up the opportunity to move towards ammonia or not, but it feels as if it's one of those things that's not yet quite been answered.
Can I maybe colour that question a little bit? Oh dear. Yeah, I'm going to green and blue actually. in some senses. There is lots of ammonia out there at the moment. It's the most shipped commodity one of the most shipped commodities in the world. But it's not green ammonia. It's produced from reformed natural gas, and then and these are very large, massive plants with huge impact. Now, at the moment, they're saying gas is so expensive that they have to hugely increase the fertilizer prices. But there isn't the supply of green ammonia is a challenge, and to some extent, the blue ammonia or the brown ammonia, I guess it's brown, isn't it? Really, from that produce more CO2 producing the hydrogen that produces ammonia than you would than by other means. That's really cheap, and it's very hard to compete with that for green technologies. I did a costing some years ago where I looked at the price of bulk ammonia, I looked at the price of bulk hydrogen, and it was actually cheaper to crack the ammonia to produce the hydrogen than it was to use hydrogen directly. So there's huge financial investment in those plants, which makes it very difficult to get green ammonia out there. And if you're using ammonia produced from fossil fuels, you're not really doing any good in the end. But it's certainly available for proving the technology. But there's a huge challenge to move into green ammonia.
Thank you.
You need enough green hydrogen to do that.
John S., you've got the next question.
Yeah, hi, John. In terms of storing ammonia, how's it done? I mean, I seem to remember working on a gas tanker years ago where it was just stored at very low temperatures, but not under pressure. But I mean, how would you envisage ammonia being stored as fuel in our sort of run-of-the-mill small vessels?
I think it's under moderate pressure or slight refrigeration, you can do it. It's a bit like LPG, I think, in that it doesn't take a lot to liquefy it. That's the only reason it's a good way of carrying hydrogen, is you can easily get it into a liquid without using too much energy. Okay,
so we'd be looking, if we look at a place like the Thames, one of the biggest challenges that we've got here is that the river's quite well disconnected from the land, really. When we first started to trial HVO, we had the devil's own job to actually get a tanker and the tug to be at the same place at the same time, and find somewhere that would allow us to actually do it. So presumably what we'd be looking at to deliver ammonia to ships is effectively some sort of small gas tanker to move the stuff around, and then we're looking at the relative cost of a small gas tanker and all the legislation around it. But there's no other way, I guess. Is that right?
It's along those lines. Yes, along those lines. I agree. I mean, diesel is a wonderful fuel. If you were designing a fuel for anything, you'd go to diesel. It's pretty hard to match it. So liquid ammonia is not going to be as good as diesel, but it's a lot more energy dense than hydrogen in terms of a tractable solution, and it's not. It might be slightly less than ammonia than methanol. It depends how you do the numbers, but methanol and ammonia are fairly similar in energy densities.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Any of our other panelists got any questions for our two speakers? Andy?
Yeah, once you speak to Alenka, I was going to ask around the where you're at from the safety side of things on the marine things with your battery technology.
So we just started looking into the battery for marine last year, and we are currently looking into certification and all that regulation. So what I can say at this stage is that our battery system is really safe because it doesn't involve any chemicals that are explosive or anything. So I don't know, sorry, did I answer your question somehow, or what it was anything specific that we would like to know about it?
I just wondered whether you were kind of engaging with people like DNV, to actually get approvals for using batteries in the marine environment. So
No, we are not there yet. We are not there yet because the battery system for the marine will be the TRL4 at the end of the project. So, but we will be engaging in the future, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Matt, that was going to be the question I asked as well, on whether how far away those batteries.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's just the feasibility study, the one that we're doing at this stage for the marine sector.
Perhaps I can ask a question.
It is more advanced in other sectors, but for the marine sector, it is just at the beginning, let's say.
Maybe I could ask a question. How scalable is the battery technology? I know that's always an issue when thinking about such a large application such as marine, but how scalable is the technology that Lena are developing? And so for a typical perhaps requirement for the marine sector, what's the weight implication? Because they're not light things, these batteries.
We are looking, yeah, I'm so sorry. You would need to talk to one of our technical leads for the batteries about the exact numbers probably, but we aim to have our batteries light. The whole model of the battery pack system is very light in comparison to the one already existing on the market. So what we have there with BB Marine at the moment, it seems to be all right. It seems to be light enough to be implemented into this operational safety vessel that we are gonna demonstrate in the future.
Thank you. John S., did you have a second question?
Yeah, that's another question for Alinka actually. Just I'm interested in how these lithium sodium batteries compare with lithium ion batteries in terms of the projected lifespan of them.
I don't know this question. Sorry. I should give you some contact details of our technical lead, and they will answer. Whatever I say, I'm not entirely sure.
It's okay. If we can capture that in the chat, we can collate the questions, and then if we can get someone from your side with the technical capabilities to answer those, we can circulate that later.
Yes,
Andy.
thank you.
Andy, did you have
another technical question, but possibly you can't answer, but around the charging characteristics of the batteries, how they charge compared to sort of standard lithium-ion batteries?
Yes, again, this would need to be this. I would need to go back to the technical lead to answer your question. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, thank you.
But yes, I will find out and I will pop these questions, these answers into the chat. So it will be there by the end of the event. Thank you.
John you have your hand up.
Just a brief comment on batteries. I've been there for a long time. These high temperature sodium batteries are pretty good on power. So that would be the niche I would imagine that one would be looking for. Historically, that's what British Rail were looking at in the 1970s. So yeah, they're generally pretty good on power, which is really important.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. And I think there we will end this block of Q&A, and it just leaves me to do a little bit of presenting on sort of next available steps. So obviously we've heard a range of different technologies today, different levels of maturity, but in terms of what kind of comes next, what is out there, and I think one of the options that at least us at Innovate UK KTN it's our job to promote and make you aware of is potential funding opportunities that are out there. Of course, financing is always available if you go to either your bank or if you're looking for venture capitalist private equity, those options are out there. But in terms of grant funding options, what is on the horizon? So as I mentioned right at the start of my sort of the event today, there are going to be future rounds of the Clean Maritime Demonstration Competition. So I said that it was announced in the spending review that 300 million, up to 300 million would be available to reduce emissions across different transport modes. Maritime is getting some of that 300 million. They're not getting all of it, but they're not getting zero either. So somewhere between 0 and 300, you take your pick. There is going to be some funds available to fund the development of clean maritime and smart shipping technologies under UK shore. I would envisage those competitions launching in the spring, but the DFT have not announced a date yet, and I'm not at liability to sort of tell you when that's coming, but watch this space is the message here. And if you wish to partner potentially with some of our speakers today, I'm sure they'd be happy to have a discussion about that. This opportunity, you might be thinking, well, why, Matt, are you telling me about trucks? We're here to talk about marine and boats. But I think a lot of the technology that's going to be developed in this particular round of funding and competitions is very applicable and translatable across to the maritime sector. So this is a spring competition that's going to be launched through the Office of Zero Emission Vehicles and probably funded by the Department for Transport, but it's feasibility studies and trials of big HGV trucks. So we're talking about a similar sort of style of engine. They're going to be probably hydrogen combustion, fuel cell, or even batteries, but the sort of related charging and fueling infrastructure is going to be very relevant for maritime sector. So why I'd want to make you aware of this opportunity is if it's going to work in the HGV sector, it's probably going to work in the maritime with a few tweaks. So another one to watch out for that's on the horizon. And one that's a really big pot of money that's delivered by BEIS is the Net Zero Innovation Portfolio. So there's £1 billion on offer across all these different strands of the this innovation portfolio. I've picked out a few specific themes here, one on carbon capture, usage and storage, which I think is applicable to the maritime sector, bioenergy, so that encompasses things like biofuels and maybe hydrogen from biogenic sources. Disruptive technology, a very broad theme, but I imagine that you can put a project around some of the themes within there. Energy storage and sort of the flexibility, the energy management systems to deliver that. And then finally, hydrogen. Now, these opportunities kind of come and go quite frequently, but there's £1 billion to spend over the next sort of spending review period. So opportunities are always going to be there. So I'd encourage you to check the BEIS website frequently to see what opportunities are available. In terms of here and now, I must admit, I don't like to promote this one, but it's always there and it's always available. This is the Innovate UK Smart Grant Competition. So this is an open scoped competition that anyone with an innovative idea that is business focused can apply into this. And I will circulate these slides because there's a link there that you can click on. But essentially, it's broken down into two different strands. If you've got a project up to 18 months, you're sort of looking at £500,000 maximum project costs, and anything up to 3 years, you can have a project cost up to 2 million or 3 million upon request. So you can apply into that. I would note that this particular funding competition is really, really competitive, and typical success rates are around 5%. So really, if you were thinking about this, I'd encourage you to think whether it is worth your time putting the resource into putting a competition application together, when we know from my earlier slides that there's perhaps some more relevant funding out there coming soon. Finally, a bit of promotion for KTN here, knowledge transfer partnerships. These are run by KTN, funnily enough, and they really work to connect a business with leading academic researchers, and then also you'd have a graduate or an associate that would work alongside you. And the aim is here that perhaps a business is looking to incorporate some of the cutting edge tech from academia, and the associate here acts as a means of knowledge transfer from academia through to business. Typical project costs are around, they're not £75, it should be 75,000 for a year, but it's a really good way of getting some funding towards getting some new cool innovative tech or services into your business. So that's one to look out for too. They're again perpetually in operation, and the current round closes 6th of April. And finally, where should you look for opportunities such as the ones I've just mentioned? Well, luckily for you, there is a collated source of funding and support opportunities, and that's hosted on the Maritime UK website. The link is there, and when you get the slides, you'll be able to click on that. So this is predominantly collated or curated by myself and people such as the catapults. We put our opportunities that we're aware of on there. So if you as a maritime or marine organization are looking for funding, you can just come to this one place. You don't have to check here, there and everywhere. Just come here and you can see what's available. And this collates opportunities from Innovate UK, BAYS, Horizon Europe, which are traditionally larger and obviously European-wide competitions, DASA, which is the Defence and Security Accelerator, local support opportunities that we might be aware of, such as your local LEP or your Growth Hub, which often have a small amount of money for business consultancy. Innovate UK KTN, we host a platform called the Innovation Exchange, which is often a good way to meet sort of people with specific technical focuses. Innovate UK Edge, part of the UKRI family and Innovate UK family, they offer kind of one-on-one business consultancy. And then across the catapult networks and anything else that may be relevant to the marine and maritime sector, we try and collate that all for you in one place to make it a lot easier to search for these funding opportunities, because we know that the landscape in the UK can be quite difficult to navigate. So that is me. On terms of funding opportunities, I'm going to stop sharing my slides now and thank, first of all, our speakers for presenting to us today. Thank you for hearing all about your sort of lovely technologies. Thank you to our panelists for acting on behalf of many of the operators on the Thames and for asking your questions to our panelists. Thank you for the PLA for putting together this event. And then finally, thank you for everyone in the audience for attending. Hopefully you found it useful and informative today. So thank you very much, everyone. And that concludes today's session.